Hello, welcome to Evening Morning Guitars. It is the morning, it is actually a Sunday morning, and today we are drinking out of Han Solo's shoes. You can see there, it's a cup of tea for a change rather than coffee, because I don't want to be up all night. And so anyway, today, rather than talking about pedals or something like that, I'm going to be talking about some cool guitars that I happen to really like. I've recommended to a number of my friends that have been looking for guitars, and I haven't had a miss yet in terms of people not enjoying the recommendation. In this case, it's Squiers of a particular period. People can be quite sniffy about Squiers, and I think that's possibly because I don't know, most people get a Squier or something like it as their first guitar, and I think there's this kind of idea that you don't have a real guitar, so you move off that to something with, you know, a sort of full fat name on the headstock, you know, in terms of brands, you know, your Ibanez's, your Gibsons, Fenders, that kind of thing. And I think people are very, very quick to dismiss Squiers, and that's not to say that there are actually a lot of problems with, especially modern Squiers. And although, like in a previous video series, we looked at this baritone 7-string copy that I got off, you know, from a Chinese copy basically. And I was relatively happy with the build quality of that. My experience of Squiers that have been made in China has been generally pretty poor. I mean, I haven't personally owned one, a lot of my friends have, and I can see why there's a hesitance to think that Squiers can be any good. But, you know, the history of the Fender Squier is, you know, a joint venture guitar that moved from being a Fender badge guitar to being something else, the Squier, in the 80s. And there was also a period where the Fender factory in the US was moving, and so they were basically making guitars over in Japan for the export market to be exported back to the US, and sometimes with American parts, sometimes with locally sourced parts. And so in particular there's a period in the 80s where if you're lucky, the quality and components in your Squier are going to be incredibly good, and even actually up to the mid-90s when you get what's known as the Silver Series Squiers, which are again sort of yeah, like I say, early to mid 90s, made in Japan Squiers, still fetch surprising prices on eBay if you see them, you know, just and it's a particularly competitive auction. You might actually see them go for a surprising price. You can still get good deals on them though, and more in guitar magazines you see that people are talking up, especially the joint venture era Squiers, but also the things that came after. And you know, something to say as well is that, you know, there's a lot of purists out there who will get upset about the way some of these were manufactured, because they, depending on which ones they were, the parts were kind of odd. Sometimes the woods that are used are particularly strange, things like that. You know, sort of you know, layered wood rather than solid wood and things like that. So, you know, obviously, like all these things, it depends on your point of view. I've never had a problem with them. I find they're awesome personally, and I'll show you some sound clips of that in a minute. But so, as a baseline anyway, we're going to use this, which incidentally actually is a Japanese made Fender Jazzmaster, which comes with its own set of quirks. As this is also a previous video, but the pickups are slightly different in Japanese Jazzmasters, and so this has been switched out for a creamery wide range humbucker. So actually this is not a very representative bass line really, because this is a modern humbucker that's effectively somewhere between a humbucker and a single coil. But I put this on here purely as a bass line for a guitar that's very good, in my opinion, and in the opinion of other people I've showed it to and let play. And also new is I've just got a stay trem collet for the tremolo to fix the common problem that you get in Craft in Japan Jazzmasters, and I'll do a very short separate video on that to explain what that is, but that's very cool too. So anyway, this is what this guitar sounds like clean. I'm going to do all of this with the rear pickup incidentally. That's what it sounds like clean. And now I'm going to mess around with, I've got a Janus fuzz down here, set to the left hand fuzz mode, so not stacked fuzz, just regular fuzz, bass engaged, no tremolo, and I've got my amp tweaker type metal as well. Hopefully you'll be able to hear very clearly which one is which. So what I'm going to do is start out with this, with the Jazzmaster, and then I'm going to move to the other two guitars. So this is the next guitar that we're looking at. This is a somewhere between 84 and 87 E5 serial number on the back there. Somewhere between 85 and 87 Squier Bullet. Squier Bullet 1 specifically. As you can see, it's kind of got a spiky Ibanez heel. It's got a Tele shape. It's got no contour obviously, and it's an HSS. This is a very unusual guitar. You see them come up very occasionally online, and you know, at the time I saw it, I only ever seen one other in my life, and I had to put it back together from parts. I bought it from a pawn shop in the United States for something very small, like $120, which at the time was, I don't know, £60 or something. So you can get these very cheap. I've done quite a lot of hacking to it over the years. You can see that there's Seymour Duncan cool rails in the middle here, and a bunch of other switches and things, a Roland GK pickup which I've added. But fundamentally, stock are these two pickups here, and I'm going to show you now what those two sound like to give you an idea of what this guitar sounds like. It's tuned to drop A, which is in a different video, so I'm not going to, I'm going to try and avoid using this string unless I know I can get away with it, because it's obviously not a standard tuning by any means. So here goes. This is the clean rear pickup. And here's the single coil. And here is both of them again with a bit of gain. never mind. Anyway, you can see you can kind of hear where that one's coming from. And I've heard as well that these rear pickups in this particular type of guitar from this period, if you get them on Japanese made guitars, are voiced more similarly to a PAF style pickup than they are to any of the Fender style pickups that came later, and especially the ones that they made to make kind of higher output hair metal-y type guitars. Although that said, this one is definitely in a reaction. It's definitely an 80s guitar. The neck is very, very flat. It's very, very, very flat indeed. So much that you can barely even feel that there is in fact a curve on it at all. It's quite chunky at the back, and it's got this tiger stripe, as you can see. It's a very quick neck. Despite being kind of maple, it doesn't really stick, and I don't know if it really. I kind of feel like maybe neckwood makes a little bit of a difference, but I don't know how psychosemantic that is. You know, whether it's just you imagine it and therefore you hear a difference. It certainly feels like quite a bright guitar, all things considered. But either way, it's a very, very cool. They're very, very cool for the money if you can get them. And in particular, this neck is just absolutely fantastic. And I've never really played another maple neck guitar that I've liked as much as this one. So yeah, this is a Japanese Squier of a particular period. The body, I believe, is alder, but it's alder in kind of laminated layers or something like that. It's not like a solid piece, if I remember correctly. And I think that's also true of the Korean ones that came later. But to be honest, I mean, it could be a chunk of plywood with the right pickup in it, and the wood is only going to make a certain part of the difference. The majority of the, at the end of the day, guitars work because of electromagnets, right? So these are electromagnets, these are metal strings, and these electromagnets, when in this situation, this body happen to make this sound. Obviously everything impacts it, from the body wood, the weight of the guitar, everything, but the relative importance of the bodywood, I think, is sometimes overstated. So although I think this is alder, it could be, like I say, it could be, it is, I think, laminated, layered pieces of alder rather than a single piece. But it could be plywood, and I think it still sounds fantastic. And I don't really care, if I'm completely honest. So that brings us neatly onto the next guitar, which is the same type of wood, I believe. And this one is a 1989 Korean Strat. So this is a 1989 made in Korea Samik, as you can tell by the S9 serial number, Stratocaster. I got it for, I think, something like 50 quid. It's very, very cheap, in other words, to get hold of these, much cheaper than the Japanese ones. And again, much cheaper even than the later Silver Series Japanese Squiers that were made in the early 90s. This one's been bashed around a lot, as you can see. And the pickguard is non-original. Somebody's put on the wrong type of pickguard because they didn't buy an import style one, so I need to replace this at some point. But as it stands, we're just the original pickups. That was the rear pickup clean. This is the front one. And this is what it sounds like with some gain. So yeah, anyway, I think this is basically the same deal, and a pretty simple single setup. You can see the saddles, you might be able to see, they're actually stamped, which is pretty neat. It's a nice little touch on otherwise, you know, I guess potentially low grade guitar. Normally the machine heads are of the same type as the Japanese one, where they're not vintage style, they're rounded and they have little Fender Fs on the back, more like that. But the previous owner has switched these out for vintage style vintage style machine heads, which personally I don't like, but you know, it makes relatively little difference for the purposes of showing it in this video. Anyway, these are super cheap. They're kind of funny because there are a lot of them knocking around. I brought this into practice the first time, and my drummer took one look at it and said, "Oh, I think I have one of those in the cupboard back home," because I mean, he started as a guitarist as well, so they're not exactly hard to come by. But compared to an equivalent guitar for the money these days, there's no way you could get one that's better, really. Again, the only other thing is that coming out of the tail of the 80s, the radius is quite flat. I don't know if it's like an 11, if I was to hazard a guess, something like that, an 11 or 12 maybe. It's not quite as flat as the 80s one, sorry, as the mid 80s one, but it's definitely a pretty flat radius. So if that doesn't appeal to you, then that's the only other thing to be aware of. Oh, no, that's a pretty sweet guitar. Oh yeah, and this is also tuned to C at the moment, so it sounds a bit flobby, that's probably why. I need to replace all the strings with some more appropriate strings. So anyway, that's been a quick look at a couple of periods of, you know, not especially representative of both those periods, but a couple of periods of Fender Squier guitars that I think are potentially, well, I think are criminally underrated, and you might have seen them knocking around and wondered if they're any good. So now you kind of know the answer, at least in my opinion, which is that they're very good, and for the money, far better than anything you can get these days. So this has been Evening Morning Guitars. If you like this, subscribe for more, and apart from that, thanks for watching.